The telegram had arrived 6 weeks ago, and Thomas Garrett had memorized every word before the ink had even dried on the thin paper. Arriving Cheyenne, June 14th, 2:47 afternoon train, Catherine. Thomas stood on the wooden platform of the Cheyenne depot as the first pale light of dawn stretched across the Wyoming Territory sky, his boots worn from 3 mornings of waiting, his heart refusing to accept what the station master kept telling him. The train was delayed. Somewhere between Omaha and here, a storm had torn through the plains with a fury that made even the old-timers shake their heads in disbelief. Rails were washed out, bridges damaged. The locomotive and its passengers were stranded, safe but stationary, while repair crews worked around the clock to restore the line. It was June of 1882, and Thomas had not seen Catherine Winters in 4 years. 4 long years since she had left Cheyenne as a girl of 17, heading east to live with her aunt in Philadelphia after her father died in a mining accident. 4 years of letters that grew from polite correspondence to something that made his hands shake when he opened them. 4 years of wondering if the girl he had known, the rancher's daughter with dirt on her skirts and laughter like a mountain stream, could possibly feel the same way about him that he felt about her. He had been 22 when she left, a cowboy working her father's ranch, too poor and too proud to say what was in his heart. Now he was 26, foreman of the largest cattle operation in Laramie County, with money saved and a future mapped out. When her last letter had mentioned coming home, he had written back immediately with an invitation to dinner, his words careful but his meaning clear. The station master, a grizzled man named Holloway, emerged from the telegraph office with his coffee steaming in the cool morning air. "You are here again," he said, his tone caught somewhere between sympathy and exasperation. "Son, I told you yesterday and the day before, that train is not getting through until they repair the tracks. Could be today, could be tonight, could be tomorrow morning. No sense in wearing a hole in my platform." "I will wait," Thomas said simply. He had taken to sleeping in the small boarding house 2 streets over, rising before dawn and walking to the station. He had sent word to the ranch that he needed a few days for personal business. His boss, a fair man who had seen Thomas grow from a green kid into someone he trusted with his entire operation, had waved him off without questions. "She must be something special," Holloway said, settling into his chair outside the office. "Most men would wait at home, come back when the train actually arrives." Thomas did not answer, but his silence spoke volumes. He watched the eastern horizon as it bloomed with pink and gold, imagining Catherine watching the same sunrise from whatever town she was trapped in. Was she frightened? Frustrated? Did she know he was waiting? The storm had hit 3 days ago on the 11th of June. Thomas had been at the station that afternoon, his Sunday clothes pressed, his hair slicked back with water, a bouquet of wildflowers wrapped in brown paper clutched in his hand. He had watched the clock hands crawl toward 2:47, his stomach a knot of anticipation and terror. When Holloway had emerged with the telegram announcing the delay, Thomas had felt the world tilt sideways. But he had come back the next morning at dawn, some instinct telling him that whenever the train managed to limp into Cheyenne, it would be early, the engineers pushing through the night to make up for lost time. And if Catherine stepped off that train with no one there to meet her, after traveling 2,000 miles to come home, Thomas would never forgive himself. On this third morning, as the sun climbed higher and the platform began to warm beneath his feet, Thomas let his mind drift back to the last time he had seen her. She had been standing in almost this exact spot, her traveling dress dark blue, her eyes red from crying. Her father had been buried only 2 days before, and her aunt had sent a stern letter insisting Catherine come east to recover among civilized people and learn proper comportment. "I do not want to go," she had whispered to him, and Thomas had nearly broken then, nearly pulled her into his arms and begged her to stay. But he had nothing to offer her then. He was just a cowboy with calloused hands and a bedroll in a bunkhouse. So he had stepped back and said, "Philadelphia will be good for you. You will see things, learn things." "Will you write to me?" she had asked, and he had nodded, not trusting his voice. Those letters had sustained him through 4 years of hard work and harder winters. Her handwriting had evolved from girlish loops to something more elegant, but her voice remained the same on the page. She wrote about the theater and museums, about her aunt's society friends, and their boring sons who called on her with flowers and empty compliments. She wrote about missing the mountains, missing the smell of sage after rain, missing home. Thomas wrote about the ranch, about the cattle drives and the new calves each spring, about the way the stars looked from the high pastures. He wrote carefully at first, aware that her aunt might read the letters, but as time went on and Catherine's responses grew warmer, he allowed himself to be more honest. He told her about buying his first horse, about the promotion to foreman, about the small house on the ranch property that came with the position. He told her, in his last letter before her announcement that she was coming home, that he thought about her every single day. Her response had been the telegram, short and simple, with a date and time. But tucked inside the envelope when it arrived had been a single pressed wildflower, the same kind he had given her the day she left. "Train coming." The shout broke through Thomas's reverie. A young boy, one of the depot runners, came sprinting down the platform. "Telegraph just came through. The eastbound made it past the washout. They are sending the westbound through now. Should be here within 2 hours." Thomas's heart kicked against his ribs like a wild Mustang. 2 hours. After 3 days of waiting, after 4 years of longing, 2 hours felt simultaneously endless and terrifyingly short. He looked down at himself, at the dust on his boots and the wrinkles in his shirt from sleeping in his clothes. There was time to go back to the boarding house to clean up properly, but some superstitious part of him worried that if he left the platform now, something else would go wrong. The train would derail. Another storm would blow in. Fate would snatch this moment away from him. Holloway must have read his expression because he chuckled. "There is a water pump around back, son. Clean yourself up a bit. I will not let that train leave without you knowing about it." Thomas nodded gratefully and headed for the pump. The water was shockingly cold, fed from a deep well, and it cleared the cobwebs of anxiety from his mind. He scrubbed his face and hands, slicked back his dark hair, and beat as much dust from his clothes as possible. When he looked at his reflection in the small mirror hanging by the pump, he saw a man weathered by sun and work, his face leaner than it had been at 22, his eyes holding a steadiness that had not been there before. Would she think he had changed too much? Would she recognize the boy she had known in this man he had become? The 2 hours passed like molasses in winter. Thomas paced the platform, sat on a bench, stood again, walked to the edge of the depot and back. Other people began to arrive, meeting their own passengers or conducting business, and their chatter filled the air around him. He heard none of it. His entire being was focused on the western tracks, watching for the first plume of smoke that would herald the train's approach. Then, finally, there it was. A dark smudge against the brilliant blue sky, growing larger and more solid with each passing minute. The distant whistle echoed across the plains, a lonesome sound that nevertheless made Thomas's pulse race. He moved to the edge of the platform, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. The locomotive rolled into the station with a great hissing of steam and squealing of brakes, the passenger cars behind it dusty and worn from their ordeal. Doors began to open, and people started to disembark, a confused, travel-weary crowd blinking in the bright sunlight. Thomas scanned every face, his breath caught in his throat. There were families, businessmen, a group of miners heading for the gold fields. There were women in traveling clothes, but none of them were Catherine. His heart began to sink. Had she not been on this train after all? Had she changed her plans? Then he saw her, stepping down from the third car with the help of a conductor, and the entire world narrowed to just her face. She was not a girl anymore. At 21, Catherine Winters had grown into a woman who made his breath stop in his chest. Her traveling dress was a soft green that brought out the color of her eyes, her dark hair pinned up beneath a modest hat. But it was her expression that undid him. She looked worried, uncertain, her gaze sweeping the platform with something that looked like desperation. "Catherine." His voice came out rougher than he intended, but it carried across the platform. Her head whipped toward the sound, and when her eyes found him, her entire face transformed. The worry melted into a smile so radiant that Thomas felt it like a physical blow. She moved toward him, not running but walking quickly, weaving through the crowd with her carpetbag clutched in one hand. Thomas met her halfway, and for a moment they just stood there, a foot of space between them that felt like an ocean. "You are here," she said, and her voice was exactly as he remembered, exactly as it had sounded in his dreams. "I thought maybe after 3 days you would have given up, gone back to the ranch." "I have been here every morning," Thomas said. "I was not going to let you arrive alone." Something flickered in her eyes, an emotion too deep and complex to name. The storm was terrible. "We were stuck in a town called Sydney for 2 days while they worked on the tracks. I tried to send a telegram, but the lines were down. I was afraid you would think I had changed my mind about coming." "I knew you would come," he said with a certainty that came from someplace beyond logic. "I just did not know when." They stood there in the middle of the platform while people flowed around them like water around stones. There were 4 years of words trapped between them, 4 years of carefully written letters that had said everything and nothing. "You look different," Catherine said finally, and Thomas could not read her tone. "Older. Good different," she added quickly, a blush creeping across her cheeks. "So do you," Thomas said. "I mean, you look beautiful. You always did, but now you look." He trailed off, aware he was making a mess of this. "I am glad you are home. So am I." The simple sincerity in her voice broke something loose in his chest. "Thomas, I need to tell you something. Those letters, they were the only thing that kept me sane in Philadelphia. My aunt tried so hard to make me into someone I am not, to marry me off to some banker's son or lawyer with soft hands and no understanding of what really matters. But every time I read your words, I remembered who I actually am. I remembered home." "Catherine." Her name was a prayer on his lips. "Let me finish," she said, and now he could see that she was trembling. "I am not the girl you knew 4 years ago. I have changed. I have seen operas and art galleries and society balls. I have worn silk dresses and learned which fork to use at fancy dinners, but none of it mattered. None of it was real. This is real." She gestured around them, at the rough wooden platform and the distant mountains and the endless sky. "You are real. And I came back because I needed you to know that everything I wrote in those letters, I meant every word." Thomas closed the distance between them in one step. "I meant every word too. I have loved you since you were 17 years old and tried to teach me how to dance at the Harvest Social. I loved you when you left, and I loved you every day you were gone, and I love you now standing here in front of me." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "I loved you too. I think I always did, even when I was too young to understand what it meant." He reached out and cupped her face in his work-roughened hands, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "I know we should probably court properly, give you time to settle in, do this the right way, but I have waited 4 years and I cannot wait any longer. Catherine Winters, will you marry me?" Her laugh was half sob, joyful and overwhelmed. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." Thomas kissed her there on the platform with the whole town watching, and he did not care who saw. Her lips were soft and warm, and she tasted like hope and homecoming. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Catherine was grinning up at him with a mischief that reminded him powerfully of the girl she had been. "My luggage is still on the train," she said, "and I have nowhere to stay. My father's house was sold years ago." "The Grand Hotel is respectable," Thomas said. "I will get you a room there, and then tomorrow we can figure everything out. But tonight, will you have dinner with me? There is a restaurant that just opened, has real tablecloths and everything. I want to do this right, even if we are doing it backwards." I would love that, Catherine said. Then, more quietly, thank you for waiting, for all 3 mornings. That means more to me than you can possibly know. I would have waited 30 mornings, Thomas said simply. 30 years, if that was what it took. They retrieved her luggage, 2 large trunks and a carpet bag that Thomas insisted on carrying himself. The walk to the Grand Hotel was only a few blocks, but it felt like a parade route with the way people stared. News traveled fast in a town like Cheyenne, and Thomas knew that by evening everyone would be talking about the foreman from the Carson Ranch and the girl who had come back from the East. The hotel proprietor, a plump woman named Mrs. Henderson, lit up when she saw Catherine. "Little Catherine Winters, though I suppose you are not so little anymore. I was so sorry to hear about your father, dear. He was a good man." "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson," Catherine said with genuine warmth. "It is good to be home, Mrs." Henderson gave her the best room on the 2nd floor, one that overlooked the main street and caught the afternoon breeze. Thomas carried her trunks upstairs and set them carefully at the foot of the bed, suddenly aware of the intimacy of being in a bedroom with her, even a hotel room with the door wide open. "I will let you rest and freshen up," he said. "I will come back at 6 to take you to dinner." "6 is perfect," Catherine said. She caught his hand as he turned to leave. "Thomas, I am not going anywhere. You do not have to look so worried." "I keep thinking I am going to wake up and find out this was all a dream," he admitted. "That I am still standing on that platform waiting." "Not a dream," she said softly. "I promise." Thomas floated more than walked back to his boarding house. He had a few hours to make himself truly presentable, to transform from the dusty cowboy who had been camping at the train station into someone worthy of taking Catherine Winters to dinner. He bathed in the copper tub the landlady provided, shaved carefully, and put on his best clothes. Dark trousers, a white shirt, a vest embroidered by one of the ranch hands' wives as a Christmas gift. He polished his boots until they shone and even attempted to do something with his hair beyond just slicking it back with water. When he returned to the hotel at 6, Catherine was waiting in the lobby, and Thomas had to remind himself to breathe. She wore a dress of deep rose-colored fabric, simpler than her traveling clothes but somehow even more beautiful. Her hair was arranged in a softer style with a few curls framing her face. When she saw him, her smile was like sunrise. The restaurant was called the Cattleman's Club, and it was the fanciest establishment Cheyenne had to offer. Thomas had made a reservation days ago, back when he still thought Catherine would arrive on schedule. The host led them to a quiet table near the window, and Thomas held Catherine's chair for her, remembering the manners his mother had drilled into him as a boy. "This is lovely," Catherine said, looking around at the white tablecloths and gas lamps. "Very civilized." "Is it as nice as the restaurants in Philadelphia?" Thomas asked, then immediately wished he had not. He did not want to think about her old life, about the fancy places she had been and the wealthy men who had surely tried to court her. "It is better," Catherine said firmly. "Because you are here with me. Those other restaurants were just buildings full of people trying to impress each other. This feels real." They ordered steak and potatoes, and while they waited for the food, they talked, really talked in a way they had never been able to do in letters. Catherine told him about her aunt, a formidable woman who had meant well but had no understanding of what Catherine actually wanted from life. She told him about the endless parade of suitors, men who talked about themselves constantly and never asked what she thought or felt. "There was one, a lawyer named Preston Whitmore, who my aunt was absolutely convinced was perfect for me," Catherine said, rolling her eyes. "He proposed 3 times. The 3rd time I finally told him the truth. I told him my heart belonged to a cowboy in Wyoming who knew how to actually listen when I spoke, who worked with his hands and understood the value of a hard day's labor, who wrote me letters that made me cry because they were so honest and real." "What did he say?" Thomas asked, fascinated and slightly horrified. "He called me a fool for throwing away a comfortable life on a romantic fantasy. Then he left, and I never saw him again." My aunt was furious with me for weeks, but I did not care. I knew what I wanted, and it was not a comfortable life with a man I did not love. And what if I cannot give you comfort? Thomas asked quietly. I am doing well, better than I ever thought I would, but I am not rich. The house I have is small, just 2 rooms really. My work is hard and the hours are long, especially during calving season and roundup. You grew up on a ranch, you know what that life is like. And after 4 years in the city, with theaters and parties and indoor plumbing. Catherine reached across the table and took his hand, silencing him. Thomas, listen to me. I spent 4 years in a place where I had everything except the one thing that actually mattered. I had beautiful clothes and comfortable beds and all the culture a person could want, and I was miserable. I do not need theaters and parties. I need mountains and open sky and a life that means something. I need you. The food arrived then, saving Thomas from having to respond past the tightness in his throat. They ate and talked more, the conversation flowing easily between them. Catherine wanted to know everything about the ranch, about the cattle and horses, about the other hands, and whether Thomas's boss was a fair man. Thomas told her about the operation, about the thousands of acres of grazing land, about the drive every fall to the railhead where they sold the steers. Do you still have your father's land? Thomas asked carefully. He knew the house had been sold, but the grazing rights to the acreage might still be in her name. I do, Catherine said. My aunt wanted me to sell it, said there was no point in holding on to land I would never use, but I refused. It is all I have left of my father, and I always knew I would come back someday. She paused, looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. It is 300 acres with good grass and a creek that runs year-round. My father always said it was some of the best grazing land in the county. Thomas knew those acres. They bordered the Carson Ranch on the eastern side, and his boss had tried several times to buy them. It is good land, he agreed. Your father had an eye for it. When we marry, Catherine said, and Thomas loved how confidently she said when, not if. That land will be ours. Combined with your salary and position, we could do well for ourselves. Maybe even build a proper house eventually, one with more than 2 rooms. You have been thinking about this, Thomas said, warmth spreading through his chest. I have had 4 years to think about it, Catherine replied. 4 years of imagining what my life could be. I want to build something real, Thomas, with you. I want to wake up every morning and see the mountains. I want to work hard and watch things grow. I want to have a family and build a home and live a life that matters. That is all I want too, Thomas said. Except I also want to kiss you again. Right now, if I am being honest, but I suppose that would scandalize everyone in the restaurant. Catherine laughed, a sound like music. Then we should probably leave soon. They finished their meal and Thomas paid the bill, trying not to wince at the cost even though he had budgeted for it. Catherine had been worth every penny, worth 100 times that. He offered her his arm as they stepped out into the warm June evening, and she took it without hesitation. The streets of Cheyenne were busy with the evening crowd, cowboys and miners and businessmen all mixing together in the distinctive chaos of a frontier town. Thomas guided Catherine away from the main thoroughfare, down quieter streets where they could hear themselves think. When should we get married? Catherine asked, her directness making him smile. I know we should probably wait, have a proper engagement, but I do not want to wait anymore. I am tired of waiting. So am I, Thomas admitted, but your aunt, does she not expect you to come back? At least for a visit. I wrote to her before I left, telling her I was staying in Wyoming. She wrote back saying if I left I should not bother returning, that I was throwing my life away. So I suppose I am cut off from that part of my family. Catherine said it matter-of-factly, but Thomas heard the hurt underneath. I am sorry, he said. I know she was difficult, but she was still family. You are my family now, Catherine said simply, or you will be, along with whatever family we build together. They had walked almost to the edge of town without Thomas really noticing, lost in conversation and the simple pleasure of being together. The sky was deepening to purple. stars beginning to emerge like pinpricks in velvet. In the distance, the mountains were dark silhouettes against the last light of day. "I missed this," Catherine said softly. "The sky, the space, the feeling that the world is huge and full of possibility. In Philadelphia, everything felt so closed in, so limited. Here I can breathe." Thomas stopped walking and turned to face her. "Catherine, I want to marry you as soon as possible. I do not care about a big wedding or a long engagement. If you are sure this is what you want, if you are sure about me, then we could see the preacher tomorrow. Get married at the church with just a few witnesses. Start our life together right away." "Are you sure?" Catherine asked, but her eyes were shining. "People will talk. They will say we are rushing, that we barely know each other after all this time." "Let them talk," Thomas said. "I have known my heart for 4 years. I am not going to pretend to be uncertain just to satisfy propriety." "Then yes," Catherine said, stepping closer to him. "Let us get married tomorrow. Let us start our life together and not waste another moment." Thomas kissed her again under the darkening sky, and this time there was no platform full of people, no audience. Just the two of them and the vast Wyoming night and a future spreading out before them like an unwritten page. They walked back to the hotel slowly, hands clasped, planning in low voices. Thomas would speak to the preacher first thing in the morning. Catherine would buy a simple dress suitable for a wedding, nothing fancy but something she would want to remember. They would need 2 witnesses, which Thomas said would be easy. His boss from the ranch and the man's wife would stand up for them if asked. At the hotel entrance, Thomas reluctantly released Catherine's hand. "I will be here at 8 tomorrow morning," he said. "We will go see Reverend Michaels and arrange everything." 8 o'clock, Catherine agreed. Then, more softly, "Thank you, Thomas, for waiting at the station, for believing I would come, for loving me." "Easiest thing I ever did," Thomas said truthfully. He watched her go inside, waited until he saw the light come on in her second-floor window, then headed back to his own lodgings with his heart so full he thought it might burst. Tomorrow he would marry Catherine Winters, and the years of waiting would finally be over. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm that had delayed the train already a memory. Thomas was up before sunrise, too excited and nervous to sleep. He dressed carefully again in his best clothes, then spent the remaining time until 8 pacing and trying to calm his racing heart. Catherine was waiting when he arrived at the hotel, wearing a dress of soft, cream-colored fabric with lace at the collar and cuffs. She had woven a few wildflowers into her hair, and Thomas thought she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. "More than ready," she said. Reverend Michaels was a kindly man in his 50s who had known Catherine's father. When Thomas explained what they wanted, the Reverend's weathered face creased into a smile. "I thought this day might come when I saw you haunting the train station," he said to Thomas. "Young love is a powerful thing. Of course I will marry you. This afternoon, if you like. That will give you time to arrange for witnesses and for Miss Catherine here to make whatever preparations she needs." They agreed on 3 o'clock that afternoon at the small church on the edge of town. Thomas sent a telegram to the ranch, and by noon his boss, Robert Carson, and his wife Mary had arrived in town, delighted to serve as witnesses. Mary took Catherine under her wing immediately, whisking her off to make final preparations while Thomas paced nervously outside the church. At exactly 3 o'clock, Thomas stood at the altar with Robert beside him, watching the church door. His hands were sweating, his heart hammering. The church was nearly empty, just a few curious townsfolk who had heard about the wedding. Then the door opened, and Catherine stepped through. She walked toward him steadily, no one to give her away but her own determination. Her cream dress was simple but lovely, the wildflowers in her hair a touch of wilderness in the civilized setting. Her eyes were locked on Thomas's face, and he saw in them everything he needed to know. When she reached him, he took her hands, and they were trembling just slightly. Reverend Michaels began the ceremony, the familiar words washing over them. Thomas barely heard it, too focused on Catherine's face, on the reality of her standing here with him. Do you, Thomas Jacob Garrett, take Catherine Ann Winters to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do, Thomas said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. And do you, Catherine Ann Winters, take Thomas Jacob Garrett to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do, Catherine said clearly, her eyes never leaving Thomas's face. They had no rings, had not had time to arrange for them, but Reverend Michaels did not seem concerned. By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Thomas, you may kiss your bride. Thomas did, pouring 4 years of waiting and longing into that kiss. When they broke apart, Catherine was crying and laughing at the same time, and Thomas felt like he could take on the world. The small congregation clapped, and Mary Carson hugged Catherine fiercely. Welcome to the family, dear, she said. Any friend of Thomas's is a friend of ours, and now you are much more than that. Robert clapped Thomas on the shoulder. You did good, son, real good. Now, I hope you are not expecting to take too much time off for a honeymoon. We have got Roundup coming in a few weeks. I know, sir, Thomas said. I thought we would take a few days, get Catherine settled in the house, then I will be back to work. Few days is fine, Robert said, and Catherine, your father's land borders ours. Thomas and I have been talking this morning, and we have got a proposition for you both, but that can wait until you are settled. For now, go enjoy being newlyweds. They had a small celebration dinner at the Cattlemen's Club, the 4 of them toasting to the new marriage and the future. As the evening wore on, Thomas became increasingly aware that this was his wedding night, that Catherine was now his wife, that they would be going home together to the small house he had prepared. He had spent the previous evening, before the train arrived, cleaning that house within an inch of its life. He had brought in fresh wildflowers and made sure the bed had clean linens and stocked the small kitchen with supplies. It was not much, but it was clean and sturdy, and it was theirs. When the dinner ended and the Carsons headed back to their ranch, Thomas and Catherine were finally alone. They had arranged for Catherine's trunks to be delivered to the house earlier in the day, and now Thomas borrowed a buggy from the livery to drive them out of town. The house was 5 miles from Cheyenne, on Carson Ranch property, situated near a creek with a view of the mountains to the west. As they drove through the gathering dusk, Catherine was silent, and Thomas worried she was regretting everything, moving too fast, marrying a man she had not seen in 4 years. "What are you thinking?" he asked finally, unable to bear the silence. "I am thinking that I am happier than I have been in 4 years, Catherine said softly. "I am thinking that this feels right in a way nothing else ever has. I am thinking that I love you, Thomas Garrett, and I am so grateful that storm delayed my train." "Why?" Thomas asked, genuinely confused. "Because it gave you a chance to show me what kind of man you are," Catherine said. "You waited for 3 mornings, not knowing when I would arrive or if I would come at all. That told me everything I needed to know about your heart. A lesser man would have waited once, maybe twice, then given up. But you were there every morning at dawn, and that means the world to me." Thomas had not thought of it that way, had simply done what felt necessary and right, but hearing Catherine explain it, he understood what she meant. "I would have waited forever," he said simply. The house came into view as they crested a small rise, a dark shape against the twilight sky. Thomas had left a lamp burning in the window, and its warm glow made the place look welcoming. He helped Catherine down from the buggy and opened the door, then turned to her with a sudden burst of tradition. "I am supposed to carry you over the threshold," he said. "If that is all right," Catherine laughed, that beautiful sound he had missed so much. "I am all right with that." Thomas swept her up into his arms, surprised by how light she was, how perfectly she fit against his chest. He carried her through the door and into their home, setting her down gently in the main room. The space was small but cozy, with a cast-iron stove in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair by the fireplace, and a door leading to the bedroom. Catherine turned slowly, taking it all in. Thomas watched her anxiously, seeing the space through her eyes. After 4 years in a grand Philadelphia townhouse, this must seem impossibly rustic and small. "It is perfect," Catherine said finally, turning to face him. "Thomas, it is absolutely perfect." The relief that washed through him was overwhelming. "Really?" "It is not much, but we can add on eventually, build more rooms if we need them." "We will need them," Catherine said with a small smile, "if we are going to fill this house with children someday, but for now it is exactly what we need. It is ours." They stood there in the lamplight, suddenly shy with each other despite everything they had said and promised. They were married now, husband and wife, and the night stretched before them full of possibility and uncertainty. "I should put the horse away," Thomas said finally. "Get him settled for the night." "I will make some coffee," Catherine said, "and maybe we can sit and talk for a bit. I know it has been a long day, but I am not quite ready to sleep yet." Thomas nodded, grateful for the reprieve. He took care of the horse, settling the animal in the small barn with feed and water, taking longer than strictly necessary to give himself time to think. When he returned to the house, the smell of coffee greeted him, and Catherine had found cups and set them on the table. They sat together, drinking coffee and talking in low voices about everything and nothing. Catherine told him more about Philadelphia, about the things she had seen and learned. Thomas told her more about the ranch, about the work he did and the men he worked with. They talked until the coffee was gone and the lamp was burning low, until the silences between words became comfortable rather than awkward. Finally, Catherine yawned and smiled apologetically. "I think the journey and the excitement are catching up with me," she said. "I should probably sleep." "Of course," Thomas said, standing quickly. "The bedroom is through there. I put your trunks in there earlier. I can sleep out here in the rocking chair, give you some privacy." Catherine looked at him with an expression that was part amusement, part exasperation. "Thomas, we are married." "You do not have to sleep in a chair, unless you want to." "No," Thomas said quickly. "I just did not want to presume. I want you to be comfortable, to feel safe." "I do feel safe," Catherine said, standing and moving closer to him. "I feel safe with you, Thomas. I always have. That is one of the reasons I fell in love with you. You have never made me feel anything but respected and cared for." Thomas reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his hand lingering against her cheek. "You are everything to me," he said softly. "I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of you." "You already are," Catherine whispered, then stood on her toes and kissed him. They went to bed together that night as husband and wife, and Thomas held Catherine in his arms as she fell asleep, still half amazed that this was real, that she was really here, that they had the rest of their lives stretching out before them. The next few days passed in a golden haze of happiness. Thomas took Catherine all over the ranch, showing her the cattle and horses, introducing her to the other hands and their families. Everyone who met her liked her immediately. She had not lost the easy friendliness she had grown up with, the ability to talk to cowboys and ranch wives with genuine interest and warmth. Robert Carson pulled Thomas aside on the 3rd day. "That wife of yours is something special," he said. "I can see why you were willing to wait at that train station. Now, about that land she owns, I have got a proposal for you both." They sat in Robert's office in the main ranch house, Catherine and Thomas on one side of the desk, Robert on the other. Mary brought in coffee and settled in to listen. "The way I see it," Robert began, "you have got 300 acres of prime grazing land, Catherine. Thomas here has proven himself to be one of the best foremen in the territory. I am not getting any younger, and my sons have no interest in ranching. They have gone east to be businessmen. So here is what I am proposing. You let me graze my cattle on your land, and in exchange, I will give Thomas a percentage of the ranch's profits on top of his salary. Over time, you could buy more land, build up your own herd. Eventually, you might even be in a position to buy this ranch from me when I am ready to retire." Thomas stared at his boss, hardly believing what he was hearing. "Mr. Carson, that is incredibly generous." "It is good business," Robert corrected. "I need someone I can trust to take over eventually, and I trust you. And Catherine, your father was a good man and a good rancher. I would like to help his daughter succeed." Catherine looked at Thomas, and he saw the excitement in her eyes mirroring his own. "We would be honored to accept," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Carson. This means more than you know." They worked out the details over the next hour, with Robert's lawyer drawing up papers that would formalize the arrangement. When they left the main house, Thomas felt like he was walking on air. "Did that really just happen?" Catherine asked, squeezing his hand. "Did we just get handed a path to owning our own ranch?" "We have to work for it," Thomas said. "It will take years, maybe a decade or more. But yes, if we work hard and are smart about it, we could have our own operation eventually." "We will work hard," Catherine said firmly. "Both of us. I grew up on a ranch, Thomas. I know how to work. I want to be your partner in this, not just your wife waiting at home." "I know," Thomas said, pulling her close. "That is one of the things I love about you. You have never been afraid of hard work." The weeks and months that followed were busy but deeply satisfying. Thomas was up before dawn every day, working the cattle, managing the hands, dealing with the 1,000 small crises that came with running a large operation. Catherine threw herself into making their small house a true home, planting a garden, learning to cook on the cast-iron stove, and often riding out to join Thomas in the afternoons to help with whatever needed doing. The other ranch families welcomed her completely. She was one of them, someone who understood their lives and their challenges. She organized social gatherings, helped when someone was sick or had a new baby, and slowly built a community around them. By the time fall arrived and the big cattle drive began, Catherine insisted on going along. Thomas was hesitant at first, worried about the dangers and the hardship, but Catherine was adamant. "My father taught me to ride and rope when I was barely tall enough to reach the stirrups," she said. "I am not some fragile flower, Thomas. I can do this." She proved it on the drive, working as hard as any of the men, enduring the dust and heat and long days without complaint. The other hands respected her for it, and Thomas fell even more in love with her watching her thrive in this world. When winter came, they spent long evenings by the fire in their small house, playing cards and reading and making plans for the future. Catherine taught Thomas the dances she had learned in Philadelphia, the two of them laughing as they waltzed around the small main room. Thomas taught Catherine the finer points of poker, which she picked up alarmingly fast. It was in February, during a week of heavy snow that kept them mostly housebound, that Catherine told him she was pregnant. They were sitting by the fire after dinner, and she just said it simply, without preamble. "I am going to have a baby. Sometime in late summer, I think." Thomas froze, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. Then he set it down carefully and turned to face her fully. "A baby, are you sure?" "I am sure," Catherine said, and now he could see the joy and fear mingled in her expression. "I am terrified and excited and happy all at once. Tell me what you are feeling." Thomas pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I am feeling like the luckiest man alive," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "A baby, our baby. Catherine, this is amazing." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, Thomas already worrying about all the things that could go wrong, Catherine more practical about what they would need. They would have to add a room to the house before the baby came, needed to find a cradle, needed to make sure Catherine had access to the doctor in town. The next months passed in a flurry of preparation. Thomas and some of the other hands built an addition to the house, a small bedroom that could serve as a nursery. Catherine sewed baby clothes and blankets, her hands always busy. The ranch women rallied around her, offering advice and hand-me-down baby items and reassurance. In late August, on a hot afternoon when the sky was bright and clear, Catherine went into labor. Thomas rode for the doctor in a panic, pushing his horse faster than was strictly safe. The doctor arrived, a calm older man named Harrison who had delivered half the babies in the county and shooed Thomas out of the bedroom. The wait was agony. Thomas paced outside the house, listening to Catherine's cries through the open window, feeling utterly helpless. Mary Carson came to sit with him, bringing food he could not eat and offering quiet reassurance. Finally, after hours that felt like years, a baby's cry split the air. Thomas was on his feet instantly, but Mary held him back. "Give them a few minutes," she said. "Let the doctor make sure everything is all right." Then the door opened, and Dr. Harrison emerged, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Garrett, a healthy, loud son, and your wife is doing well. You can go in now." Thomas entered the bedroom on shaking legs. Catherine was propped up in bed, her hair damp with sweat, her face exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket, and when Thomas approached, she pulled the blanket back to show him. His son had a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face, his tiny fists waving as he made small mewing sounds. Thomas reached out with one finger and touched his son's hand, awed when the tiny fingers wrapped around his own. "He is perfect," Thomas whispered. "Catherine, he is absolutely perfect." "We made him," Catherine said wonderingly. "This little person is ours. What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never settled on anything. Now, looking at his son, Thomas knew. "James," he said, "after your father, James Garrett." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "James," she repeated. "Yes, that is perfect." The next weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Thomas discovered that fatherhood was both harder and more rewarding than anything he had ever done. He learned to change diapers and warm bottles, to walk the floor at 2 in the morning with a crying baby, to function on almost no sleep. Catherine recovered quickly, soon back to her usual energy, though now that energy was focused on their son. She was a natural mother, patient and loving but also practical. When James was 6 weeks old, she fashioned a carrier that allowed her to strap him to her chest and continue with her daily work. "Women have been having babies and working for all of human history," she said when Thomas worried. "James will be fine. Better for him to be with us than left alone somewhere." As James grew from infant to baby to toddler, the ranch prospered. True to his word, Robert Carson gave Thomas a percentage of the profits, and they saved every penny they could. Slowly, month by month, their nest egg grew. They bought a few head of cattle of their own, branded with a simple GW for Garrett winters, and grazed them on Catherine's land alongside Robert's herd. When James was 2, Catherine became pregnant again. This time Thomas was less panicked, more confident. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah, was born in the spring with much less drama than her brother. She had Catherine's green eyes and Thomas's dark hair, and from the moment she drew breath, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. The years flowed past like water, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the horses and followed Thomas everywhere. Sarah was wild and fearless, wanting to do everything her brother did. Catherine managed the household and the children and still found time to work the ranch alongside Thomas. When James was 6 and Sarah 4, Robert Carson called Thomas and Catherine to his office once again. He was in his 70s now, slowed by age and arthritis, and there was a gravity to his expression that Thomas had not seen before. "I am retiring," Robert said without preamble. "Mary and I are moving to town, going to live somewhere we do not have to work so damn hard. And I am offering to sell you the ranch. I have had it appraised, and I know it is more than you have saved, but I am willing to finance it, let you pay me over time. You have earned this, Thomas. Both of you, this ranch has never been in better shape than it has under your management." Thomas looked at Catherine, saw his own shock and excitement reflected in her face. The ranch was 12,000 acres with a large herd and good buildings. It was more than they had dreamed of, at least this soon. "We would be honored," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. Mr. Carson, I do not have words for what this means. No words needed, Robert said gruffly. Just keep making this place successful. That is all the thanks I need. They worked out the terms, payments that would stretch over 20 years but that Thomas felt confident they could manage. The day they signed the papers, making them the official owners of the Carson Ranch, Catherine cried. These were happy tears, tears of achievement and pride and gratitude. My father would be so proud, she said, holding the deed in trembling hands. He always dreamed of having a big operation like this, and now we actually do. We have a lot of work ahead of us, Thomas said practically, but he was grinning. 20 years of payments, and we cannot let the quality slip at all. We will do it, Catherine said with absolute certainty. We will work together like we always have, and we will make this ranch the best in Wyoming. She was right, of course. Over the next decade, they poured their hearts and souls into the ranch. They expanded the herd, improved the bloodlines, built better facilities. They hired good people and treated them fairly, earning loyalty and hard work in return. The ranch's reputation grew, and buyers sought out their cattle specifically for their quality. James and Sarah grew up working the ranch, learning the business from the ground up. James was a natural leader, quiet but respected by the hands. Sarah was the better rider, able to gentle the most skittish horse with patience and kindness. When James was 16, Catherine became pregnant again, a surprise that left them both shocked and delighted. At 37, she had not expected another child, but the pregnancy was healthy, and that fall she delivered twin boys, Matthew and Daniel. I think we are done now, Catherine said, exhausted but laughing as she looked at the two infants. 4 children seems like plenty. More than plenty, Thomas agreed. He was 42 now, still strong but feeling his age more than he once had. These boys will keep us young, though. And they did. Matthew and Daniel were a handful from the start, getting into everything, keeping their older siblings busy chasing after them. But they brought joy and laughter into the house, and Thomas loved watching Catherine with them, still as patient and loving as she had been with their first 2. The years continued their steady march. James married at 22, a sweet girl named Emma from a neighboring ranch, and built a house on the property with Thomas's help. Sarah, independent and spirited, shocked everyone by moving to Denver at 19 to attend a teacher's college, insisting she wanted to see something of the world before settling down. She gets that from you, Thomas told Catherine. That independence, that drive to experience things. And she gets her stubbornness from you, Catherine countered, but she was proud of their daughter for having the courage to pursue her dreams. Matthew and Daniel grew into sturdy young boys, helping around the ranch and attending the schoolhouse in town. The ranch prospered, the payments to Robert Carson steadily whittled down. In their 20th year of ownership, they made the final payment and the ranch was theirs free and clear. They were in their late 40s then, Thomas 48 and Catherine 43. The years had left their marks, silver threading through their hair, lines etched into their faces by sun and weather and laughter. But when Thomas looked at Catherine, he still saw the girl on the train platform, still felt his heart skip a beat. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their now much expanded house, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink, Catherine took his hand. "Do you remember when you waited for me at the train station?" she asked. "All 3 mornings, standing there at dawn." "I remember everything about those days," Thomas said. "The fear that you would not come, the hope that you would, the way my heart stopped when I finally saw you step off that train." 25 years, Catherine said softly. "We have been married 25 years. We have built a life together, a family, a successful ranch. We have weathered storms and droughts and hard times, and I have loved every single day of it. I have loved you every single day." "I love you too," Thomas said, pulling her close. "More now than I did that day on the platform, if that is even possible. You are my partner in everything, Catherine. You always have been." They sat in comfortable silence as the light faded, two people who had built a life together from nothing but love and hard work and determination. Inside the house, they could hear Matthew and Daniel arguing good-naturedly about something. From the smaller house visible in the distance, lamplight glowed in James and Emma's windows, where their two grandchildren were likely being put to bed. Sarah had returned from Denver the previous year with a degree and a husband, a fellow teacher named Benjamin, and they were building yet another house on the ranch property. The land that Catherine had inherited from her father, combined with what they had built, now stretched over 15,000 acres. The Garrett Winters brand was known throughout the territory, synonymous with quality cattle and fair dealing. It was more than Thomas had ever dreamed possible, that dusty morning when he had stood on the train platform watching the eastern horizon and hoping. More than he had imagined when he had been just a cowboy with calloused hands and nothing to offer but his heart. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if that storm had not delayed the train?" Catherine asked. "If I had arrived on time," Thomas considered the question. "I would have been waiting on the platform that afternoon instead of at dawn. I would have seen you and loved you just the same." "Maybe it would have been less dramatic, but the outcome would have been identical. We were always meant to be together, Catherine. The storm just gave me a chance to prove how much I meant it. You have spent every day of our marriage proving it," Catherine said. "Every single day, Thomas. And I hope you know I feel the same way. Choosing you, choosing this life, was the best decision I ever made. I have never regretted it, not for one moment." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss on this very land all those years ago, Thomas kissed his wife again. It was not the passionate kiss of young lovers, but something deeper and more profound. The kiss of two people who had built a lifetime together and knew they would walk the rest of the path hand in hand. The storm that had delayed her train had seemed like a disaster at the time, 3 days of anxious waiting and uncertainty. But it had given them the story they told their children and grandchildren, the tale of the cowboy who waited at the platform each dawn because his love was strong enough to outlast any storm. It had set the tone for their entire marriage, built on patience and faithfulness, and a love that endured through everything life threw at them. As they finally stood to go inside, Catherine looked back at the mountains one last time. "I am glad I came home," she said simply. "So am I," Thomas replied, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Every single day I am grateful you came home to me." They walked into their house together, into the warmth and light and life they had created, two people who had found each other against the odds and built something lasting and true. The ranch would continue for generations, passed down to their children and their children's children, a legacy of love and hard work. But the real legacy was simpler than land or cattle or buildings. It was the story of a girl who came home and a cowboy who waited, of 3 mornings at a train platform, and a lifetime built from that foundation of devotion. It was proof that the best things in life were worth waiting for, that faith and love could overcome any obstacle, even a terrible storm that delayed a train for 3 long days. As they settled into bed that night, Thomas pulled Catherine close, her head resting on his shoulder as it had 1,000 nights before. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of tomorrow. Inside, 2 hearts beat in comfortable rhythm, still in love after 25 years, still building their life together one day at a time. "Good night, my love," Catherine murmured, already drifting toward sleep. "Good night," Thomas replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I will see you at dawn." It was a promise he had kept for 25 years, a promise he would keep for all the years remaining to them. Because that was what love meant in the end, showing up day after day, dawn after dawn, no matter what storms might come. And as sleep claimed them both, wrapped in each other's arms in the home they had built together, the story that had begun on a train platform came full circle, complete and whole and exactly as it was always meant to be.